Is the audio working? Yes, it is now, because I remembered to turn on the microphone. So it is working now. Anyway, okay. Yes, hello, I can hear myself. It should be, there's like a 10-second delay. It'll all get worked out. Okay, that's a good question. I have now fixed the audio, I hope. Let me linger on this for a moment, and if someone can say audio is working, that'd be great. Okay, have I posted all the class videos? Yeah, so I need to go through and update from the 13th. They're all, again, if you ever are looking for them and I haven't posted them yet, they're all on the live tab of my YouTube channel. So you can go and find them there. They're all there, but I just haven't linked them into the playlist. I just have not had time. It's been a kerfuffle, I say. Okay, I'm hoping that the audio's there now. No one is saying anything. Okay, thank you, you charming and wonderful person. All right, so what are we doing now? All right, so yeah, so when it comes to kind of other questions in education, like I said, I got just like 2 slides left here. You know, when we talk about disadvantaged group, so we talked a little bit, you know, when we talked about race, about, you know, Black people, especially in the US. Canada has similar sort of issues when it comes to people from an Indigenous background. You know, typically lower educational achievement in Indigenous communities, right? And basically what, say, critical race scholars, so race scholars and Indigenous scholars have suggested is that this is, you know, a product of social forces over time, right? That, you know, particular things like focuses on topics that are of interest to white people, right? White histories, that kind of idea of the hidden curriculum, you know, less investment in schooling for Indigenous people, you know, and, you know, if you've ever heard of something called Jordan's Principle, one of the big problems for Indigenous people in Canada, as regards to all social services, is that officially, you know, Indigenous people and their services are the purview of the federal government, right? This is governed by the, you know, unfortunately named Indian Act of 1876, right? Which is still the governing legislation that governs, you know, Crown Indigenous relations, 1876. It's been amended and updated since 1876. It's not the same legislation, but it still puts Indigenous relations as a specifically federal responsibility. And to be perfectly blunt, the federal government sucks at Indigenous relations. It is chronically underfunded Indigenous communities, and the provinces, you know, rightly seeing this as a federal responsibility, have been reticent to put provincial money into things like Indigenous education and Indigenous efforts because the Constitution says that's a federal responsibility. So Indigenous people have sort of been hit, you know, in negative ways by the sort of like passing the buck between the federal and provincial governments in Canada, neither of whom really want to pay for better education for Indigenous people. And especially the provinces are like, well, that's a federal responsibility, except that education is always managed at the provincial level because that's what it says in the Constitution. Now, that said, Indigenous participation rates in, you know, post-secondary education have been getting better, right? More Indigenous people are attending universities. You know, so that is improving slowly over time, but it's still nowhere near where it should be. And it is still much, much lower a rate than, say, the Canadian population overall. And yeah, closing that gap would go a long way, you know, for effects on suicide, incarceration rates, family stability, health outcomes, civic participation, wealth, right, in terms of the overall poverty rate amongst Indigenous people, which is considerably higher than the population overall. Okay, we want to talk top 10 countries for educational achievement. I think this is out of 2012, so this is a little bit dated, but it looks very similar. You know, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, reading, Canada sitting 5th. Canada, which, you know, in science kind of goes up and down. It's been as high as 3rd and as low as like 15th. And then math, right? Math, I think Canada at times, again, has risen up into the top 5, and then currently it's sitting a little bit lower, and Canada's scores have been dropping ever since the kind of trend in math education became what's called discovery math, where it's like, choose your own method for learning to solve the math problem, which has proven to be a complete and utter catastrophe, proving once and for all that the education faculty at every university doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. And the teacher education is mostly a waste of time. No, that's not true. My wife's a teacher. I like to make fun of her, but there are trends that go through education, and education, like teacher education, I was gonna say, but that makes no sense. And one of the trends was discovery math, and it's been a complete catastrophe. And we see that in the sinking scores in Canada, especially on math. We used to be like really good, now we're middling. Okay, we'll see if there's any other questions. No, all right. I am going to switch sets of slides now. We're going to go to, like I said, what will either be our last or second last topic of the course. And depending on how you feel about the course, I suppose you'll either love it or hate it. I know the screen's off. Just give me half a sec to fix that. In this room in particular, every time I exit out of a PowerPoint, it goes completely dead, and I have to fix it. Okay. So we are the last or second last topic. And I mean, I guess we've got essentially 4 classes and then the final class, which will be review. So it's probably our last topic is religion. We probably won't get to mass media. Okay, different Slido for this one, and I will say religion, I have saved it for last, so when you have the least energy and when I need my favorite topic so that I, have more energy. Do feel free to ask questions. And I teach a sociology of religion class in the fall every year. Yes, you are right. Alberta does have some of the best education when it comes in Canada, specifically when it comes to reading and science. And arguably Alberta, and I'll say this, Alberta since probably about 1993 has been dragging up the overall scores in Canada. So Alberta and Ontario have the best scores. The Maritimes have absolutely dismal scores. I'm sorry if you're from the Maritimes. But reading, math, and science in the Maritimes is dismal. Quebec's scores are incredibly middling. And then, the other prairie provinces and BC are also kind of in the middle. So Alberta and Ontario really drag up the overall scores for Canada in general. And it's the Maritimes, especially PEI, which is one of the poorer provinces in Canada, that really drags everything down. Okay. They're walking out on you already. Okay, let's talk religion. Okay, so religion. Strange that one of my favorite topics is also one of the ones that's hardest to talk about. So religion is one of the weirdest areas in sociology because it has historically been one of these areas that is almost impossible to come to a consensus of even a basic definition of what religion is. And here, we run into, I think, what's fundamentally sort of a problem of the Western mind, right? A problem of kind of Eurocentrism, that ultimately, when we think of religion, we're thinking of Christianity, right? Or maybe Judaism and Islam a little bit. But that fundamentally the Western experience of religion is Christian. And so when people have tried to create definitions of religion, that are kind of universal in their application, that would apply equally to, say, Jainism or, different forms of Buddhism, Hinduism, and all sorts of things, you run into a fundamental problem that these things are very, very different. And so essentially, right, we can kind of say there's 2 major problems with most of the kind of definitions of religion. And, I'll talk about 3 kind of big categories: functional, substantive, and social constructivist definitions. Is they either end up being too broad, and they include a bunch of things that are not religion, like nationalism, right? Nationalism, and this is to the point where, Robert Bellah, who's a famous sociologist of religion, included, what he called American civil religion, which I won't write the whole thing, but American civil religion. No worries. It's not your fault. It's underinvestment in infrastructure at the university. The chairs in Tory are even worse. Trust me. Ooh, my mic cut out. So basically, American civil religion, or basically American nationalism as a form of secular religion, right? So they can either be too broad and it encompasses a bunch of things that are not religion clearly, or so narrow that it only includes religions with certain qualities, right? So it would fit, say, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, the three Abrahamic religions, but it wouldn't fit, say, different forms of Buddhism, Jainism, Chinese folk religions, Confucianism, and all of these other kind of quasi-religious systems. So, we have basically these three categories that I talked about, so this will be quick, right? Substantive definitions, which are mostly, symbolic interactionism. Functional definitions, which are structural functionalism, right? Functionalist, that's the easy one. And then social constructivist, which are typically critical, or conflict theory, right? Conflict theory, those are the kind of three big categories of historical definitions of religion. Okay, wow, this is a boring slide. I'm sorry. It's all white. So, functional definitions, right? So these kinds of things that come from, say, Durkheim. Basically, they focus on the work or the things that religions do in a social or psychological system, right? So I'm going to highlight some stuff. In a social or psychological system, right? So when we talk about, their social function, right, what do? Okay, coherence, right? So they give groups a sense of coherence. If everybody is part of the same religion, they all feel like they belong, right? And you're all doing the same rituals, you're all, if we're talking like medieval Europe, or, you're all going to church on Sunday morning, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, right? You're all doing the same things. You go through the Mass, right? Everything's in Latin, right? So there's a coherence. You're all part of the same system. It gives a social order, right? It tells you what's right and what is wrong, right? So it involves basically shared morals and values and codes of conduct. So religious systems, in a functional definition, have these things, and a defense of group interests, right? So it's, and let me put it in these terms, religion creates an us versus them kind of mentality, right? Us versus, I know my us and versus look the same, spikier V's, versus them, right? It's us versus them. It's, Catholic versus Protestant. I'm just going to put Prot. Or, Christian Muslim. I'm going to draw a little cross. Christian versus Muslim, and I'm just going to draw a little crescent because I'm too lazy to write Muslim. That's a terrible crescent. Looks like a bagel or a croissant. Anyway, not important, right? You get what I'm saying, right? Creates an us versus them and allows you to kind of manifest the group in defense of your shared values. Okay, it also has psychological functions, right? So it does things for your mind. It provides you with stories, specifically stories that give order to the world, right? It answers the kind of why are things the way they are questions, right? Why is there suffering? Why are we here? What is the purpose of life, right? These religions offer this kind of psychological system. It offers symbols, right? Text, symbols, things that we, especially in Durkheim's conception, it splits symbols specifically between the profane and the sacred, right? So it kind of splits the world into the sacred and the profane, right? What's part of religion, what's not part of religion. And it gives rituals, right? And the rituals that involve sort of collective action, right? So you all do the same things, you have the same ceremonies, right? We just went through Easter, right? Easter is a bunch of rituals that people go through every single year and all that jazz. So, from a functional perspective, religion is a set of tools to act on and interpret the world. Okay, so yeah, what does this look like in principle, right? So these are some kind of ways that this has been articulated. Probably the most famous one is number 3. This is the one that you find in all the textbooks when they talk about functional definitions. So what is it? Okay, Karen Durkheim. A religion is a unified set of beliefs and practices related to sacred things. That is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church, right? And you even see like in Durkheim's definition, right? A moral community called a church. By the way, if you're Muslim, according to Durkheim, your synagogue or your mosque is a church. Right? And if you're Jewish, your synagogue is a church. So, you know, there's a bit of Eurocentrism there. And you can see the Eurocentrism in the way that that's articulated. All of those who, you know, unite into one single moral community called the church, all those who adhere to them, right? Bella, right, what does he say? Religion's a set of symbolic forms and acts which relate man to the ultimate condition of his existence. That is a very vague definition, but it's super on brand for Bella. And Clifford Geertz, this is the most famous one, and this is one you see in all the textbooks, right, is a system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive, long-lasting moods and motivations in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. Deep breath. It's a long definition. Okay, so what are the critiques of a functionalist definition of religion? They are too broad, right? That is the big critique. As I kind of mentioned, they're way too broad. Many of those definitions, right? If you think of Clifford Geertz's definition, right? A set of symbols that establishes a powerful, pervasive, and lasting moods and motivations in men, right? That could be these things. Right? All these symbols of American nationalism, in some ways, do all of those things, right? So yeah, you can apply most of them to say American nationalism, right? Because it has sacred things, right? The United States, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the founders, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the American flag, right? There's forbidden beliefs and practices, communism, infringement on the right to own firearms, and there are rituals, right? Like the Pledge of Allegiance, which again, I've heard so many times on television that I can actually recite it, though I am not American. But obviously, right, when we think about it, outside of Robert Bella, who says, oh, American nationalism is a form of what he calls civil religion, right, or a secular form of religion, you know, aside from that kind of thinking, it's pretty obvious that American nationalism is not a religious phenomenon. It's something different. So, that's the criticism. The criticism. Okay, great question. Could you elaborate on the difference between profane and sacred symbols? One of the big problems, and I'll answer this way. One of the big problems that comes from Durkheim's definition and his splitting things into profane and sacred, and this is a criticism that my spirit animal, his name is Rodney Stark, he's the honey badger of sociology of religion, and I love him deeply. He died a few years ago, and I'm still sad about it. His big complaint with Durkheim, and he's correct in this, is Durkheim never defines what he means by profane and sacred. And so people have been left to sort of fill in the gaps. But basically, you know, the profane things that are sacred are all of the things that belong to the realm of religion, right? So it would be like a church, you know, the robes that a priest wears, the symbols like if you're talking Catholic, right, the chalice, the tabernacle. Sorry, I'm forgetting my Catholic terminology, right? And each religion is going to have their own kind of sacred things, right? The person of Jesus himself, right? All of those things would belong properly to the realm of the sacred. And the profane is everyday things, right? The things of the world that aren't sacred. And again, I know that's a little, but so like my shoes would be profane, right? This outfit would be profane. This building would be profane because it's not there for sacred purposes. So essentially everything that isn't sacred is part of the world of the profane. Are you taking pictures of each other? I don't know what's going on. I just looked up and there's two people pointing their phones at each other. It's weird. Like, interesting. Okay, so that's the sacred and the profane. You can take pictures of me. I'm ugly, but it's fine. Okay, so do you need to know all of the examples of those functionalist definitions for the exam? No, I only put them there for your education. But remember the problem of a functional definition, right, which is that it's too broad, and that's what you need to know from there. Okay, how are we doing? All right, so substantive definitions, right? So substantive definitions tend to be definitions about what's in religion, right? So what is it that's inside of religion? Like what are the beliefs of religious people? So substantive definitions, right, defining religion in terms of beliefs and actions. So in these types of definitions, what do you get? Basically an idea that all religions should share common patterns of content. So E.B. Taylor says, right, religions as a belief in the supernatural, right, or in supernatural beings, typically includes some kind of view of religion that embraces gods, or transcendence. And Herbert Spencer puts, religion is the recognition that all things are manifestations of a power which transcends our knowledge. Okay, so I mean, it's about what's in religion, right? The belief systems, right? So almost all substantive definitions deal with some idea of like the supernatural, you know, God, big G God, little g gods, and all that jazz. Okay, so the problem with substantive definitions is they are too narrow, right, and often seen as exclusive, and specifically, you know, typically in the kind of Judeo-Christian sense, right? It's like, okay, religions, you know, and especially as they were being defined in the earlier days of sociology, were very much about, you know, religions that look like Christianity, right? Christianity, that's my cheap and fast way of writing Christianity, Zionity. Christianity, right? So things that looked like what was recognizable, right? And Christianity believes in a God, right? And it believes in the supernatural. However, one of the problems is there are a variety of religions out there that make no reference to a transcendence, or spirits or gods, right? There are forms of Buddhism, for example, that essentially have stripped away all of that. Other religions that don't have, you know, a god or gods or an afterlife, religions essentially are as varied as the types of human societies they come out of. And so, you know, it fits really well for our traditional conception of religions, which are fundamentally Western, right? They're Western and they're Abrahamic. Right? So that would be, you know, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all of which claim their descent from Abraham, right? From a biblical figure named Abraham. So it fits really well for those ones. It fits a lot less well for, say, a lot of indigenous religions, for Chinese folk religion, for forms of Buddhism, right? They don't fit in this, right? So, it makes this kind of definition basically useless. And this debate, you know, basically went from the middle part of the, I guess I'll talk very quickly about constructivist definitions in a sec, but basically, you know, this kind of debate went essentially from the middle part of the 19th century until the 1990s. At that point, a very famous sociologist of religion, his name's Andrew Greeley, said that attempting to define religion was essentially hopeless, because no one could come up with a definition that worked for everyone in all cases. Okay. Am I religious? I choose not to answer the questions on the ground that it might incriminate me. How do these differentiate between religions and cults? All right, so you're skipping to my last few slides here. Cults are essentially what you would call a new religious movement, right? I'll talk about new religious movements at the end of this particular section. New religious movements, right? So the religions that spring up, most of them do not make it, right? Most of them do not last, but there are religions being born, maybe not every day, but with relative frequency, right? There is a lot of religions kind of popping up all the time. Korea, for some reason, is a particular hotbed of new religious movement. There is one group that emerged from Korea, and they stopped me on campus to talk to me about something at least once a term. And it's always the same guy. And I'm like, dude, we've done this. No, we're not doing this again. And always when I'm like in a rush to go pick up my kids or something, it's like, it was right before Easter. He's like, would you like to hear about, the biblical role of Passover? I'm like, no, not in the slightest. We've talked about this before. Get out of my way. Anyway, they accost me all the time. It comes out of Korea. It's super fun. Anyway, but yes, cults are essentially forms of religion. They're just religions that have yet to establish themselves. We call them in sociology of religion new religious movements because cult is a little bit impolite, but most of them don't make it. But we'll talk about that towards the end. Okay. Alrighty. So the social constructivist view, which again you can call the conflict theory view, and you'll see my big long-ass quote from Marx at the bottom here, right? So basically, social constructivists see religion as too diverse for a single definition. Instead, they look at religion as a social construct and look at the process by which systems of belief come to be called religion. I would say this is probably the dominant view, in conflict theory, but also psychology, tends to take this kind of view as well. Okay, psychology, right? And specifically, if you look at like Freud's definition of religion, which I do talk about in sociology of religion, but not here, it's this kind of social constructivist definition, right? So basically they view, and I'll talk about a little bit about Peter Berger in a sec. He was a very famous 20th century sociologist of religion, and this is his kind of view. But basically, they say religion is just any other institution, like any other institution that emerges from social systems. And I got this really, really long quote from Marx, which you will have to have memorized word for word for the midterm, or for the final. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't do that. You will have to write it. There'll be a small short answer section where you have to repeat this word for word. No, I'm kidding. But, this is the kind of Marxist definition, right? Man makes religion, religion does not make man, right? So basically, this is the kind of Marxist view that we see, in his kind of teacher, Ludwig von Feuerbach, which we see also in Freud. Religion is just, part of the human psyche. It emerges from us to serve our purpose, right? So self-consciousness and self-esteem of man, right? And by that he means man in the general kind of sense, right? So it comes out of our societies to serve those societies, especially for Marx, it is it serves the powerful, right? Do I have that on the next slide? Okay, no, I don't. But it serves the powerful. And one of the Marxist critiques, and this gets picked up by feminism in the conflict theory kind of form of feminism, is that religion basically reinforces the social system, right? Because it emerges from the social system, and the social system for Marxists is always created by the powerful. Religion is just in service of the powerful, right? So it supports the class order in a capitalist society, right? The bourgeois get to be rich because God said they could be. It supports the patriarchy, right? Men get to be in charge because God said they should be, right? This is the sort of social constructivist conflict view of religion. It's good for, and specifically critiquing, say, functionalism, which says, religion and these shared values is really good for social stability. Conflict theorists and conflict feminists especially will say, yes, it's good for social stability, but it also keeps people oppressed, right? All right. Do I have is that the opium of the people quote is not in there, but anyway. So, the constructivist view, right, which tends, wrong pen, or maybe not, which tends to, critique the functional view, especially, and this view of social stability, and says, actually it's just part of the system of oppression, struggles with a couple of things, right? And one in particular is, how religion is, can be part of social stability, but it can also be an important aspect of social change. Right? And now Marx wouldn't have known this because Marx's historical view was rather limited, but things like the civil rights movement, right? Civil rights in the US, right, the African American struggle for freedom was largely driven by religious figures, right? And Martin Luther King, right, our friend MLK, was a Protestant pastor, a black pastor, and used very Christian language to appeal to other Christians that especially in the north of the US, that the oppression that was being visited on them was fundamentally incompatible with Christianity. Right? If you ever listen to the "I Have a Dream" speech, right? It's one of the great speeches of history. It is fundamentally deeply Christian in its orientation, right? So Christianity can play a huge role in social change, right? You have a long history in Europe of kind of Christian Democrats, right, where they use kind of Christian principles to argue for better rights for workers and stuff. So the Marxist view, right, that conflict theory view, often, and you still have Christian democratic parties in Europe, often sort of, only sees the oppressive side of religion, of which there certainly is lots, but ignores some of those other aspects of religion. Okay. Okay. We live in a society. I hope that's not the only thing you've taken away from this course. But good job. You're on day one. Okay. Feels as though the psychodynamic model and conflict theory have a lot in common, for sure. There's a live section where the videos are posted on YouTube. Yes, and I'll post them on the playlist as well. I'm behind on menial tasks. Okay. So, my buddy Karl Marxi. All right, theories of religion in particular. Right, so very specific theories of how religion works. Okay, so Marx, and deprivation theory, so you can think conflict theory. So the specific idea that Marx has of religion, how am I doing for time? 13 minutes, I'm doing good. The specific idea of how religion works for Marx is called deprivation theory, right? Now, Marx, you have to keep, and this is the famous quote from Marx, right? The one that people almost always know from Marx and his feelings about religion, that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of the soulless condition. It's the opium of the people. And what does that mean, right? So for Marx, especially the capitalist system was one, but the feudal system before it as well, was one that was marked by tremendous hardship for people. And what Marx thought was that basically it was the sort of suffering of people that made them turn to religion, right? Why did you turn to religion? Well, it was like why you would get drunk or why you would turn to opium, right? Because the world is such a painful, awful place that you need something to numb the horror, right? So religion, he thought, was that thing on a kind of social level, right? People would turn to religion to numb the pain of life. And especially, right, this idea of heaven for Marx was particularly pernicious. And again, this is a very Christian, Marx's critique of religion is a lot about Christianity, right? It doesn't apply in some other ways to other religions. So what Marx basically said, right, what do I say here? You lived in a society of tremendous social stratification, right? You had the proletariat, the bourgeoisie. Capitalism was fundamentally alienating workers. Ruling class values predominated over the values of the working class. And he saw religion as propagating those values. And specifically, it promised for people living in poverty and deprivation a kind of happy future after you die, right? Just do what you're supposed to do in this world, go to church, and hope that when you die, heaven is going to be an eternal banquet. You might be hungry now, but heaven is an eternal banquet where you get as much to eat and there's no tears and all that jazz that comes out of, Christianity and Revelation in particular, or the book of Revelation. So he said, it tranquilizes the underprivileged into accepting the world as it is, right? So they don't long for social change. And, specifically, he says that church authorities often support gender and class inequalities, right? And you remember Friedrich Engels' critique of patriarchy and gender roles, right? That religion often is marshaled in support of this. It actually supports things like patriarchy, right? And you have biblical passages, it's like, wives, obey your husbands, right? I think that's out of, I think it's out of Corinthians, but I can't remember. It could be out of Ephesians, I don't remember. Right, Christianity's promise of the afterlife makes living in a shitty world seem kind of livable. Now, Marx fundamentally believed, this is not Karl Marx, this is Groucho Marx. This is a comedian. Marx believed that religion ultimately would fade away, right? Because it was part of what made economic oppression possible. And he thought capitalism was doomed to destruction. Specifically, right, it held the seeds of its own destruction, right? So it had planted the seeds of the proletariat, and eventually the proletariat would realize how much things suck, and there's more of them than the bourgeoisie, and overthrow the bourgeoisie, leading to socialism, and then eventually communism. Can only say in a Russian accent, bad one. Okay. Right, communism. And communism in particular, the means of production, the ownership of the means of production would be shifted to the workers. And so they would have enough food. And given, once you had enough kind of material, enough wealth, right, and you weren't hungry anymore, you wouldn't need the opium of the people anymore, right, or the opium of the masses. Religion would simply fade away because the purpose of religion would disappear. And as we know, that's exactly what didn't happen. Okay. This is a good question. That's a really good question. So, deprivation theory fundamentally sort of fits under the aegis of kind of conflict theory and social constructivism, right? It views religion fundamentally as coming out of a social need, right? It was constructed by a society to meet a very particular social need, which was dulling the living pain, the pain of living in a harsh world, right? But it is a reflection of that society. So for Marx, right, when that society disappears, when we move from, the deprivation of the proletariat under capitalism to the thriving of everybody and everyone's material needs being met under socialism and then communism, then you wouldn't need religion anymore, right? So that reflection of us that is, we suffer, so we need something to dull that pain under capitalism disappears under socialism. So, it's all about, it emerges from us and our needs. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so Emile Durkheim, and this is a book, if you take classical social theory, sometimes they'll still make you read this book. It's a little painful, to be honest. I'm not such a huge fan of reading Durkheim. So Durkheim, when he's writing his kind of theory of religion, and I'll just tell you about it, and again, it's a functional definition. How am I doing? Okay, and it puts the fun in functionalism, right? So he writes this book in 1912, right? So it's over a century old now. So basically what Durkheim does in constructing his kind of theory of what religion is he looks at a bunch of research from other people, specifically anthropologists who've been to Polynesia and to Australia. Because what Durkheim was hoping to do is get back to, and again, this like very colonialist, very kind of Eurocentric thinking. He wanted to find the most, what he thought was as a primitive form of religion, right? To find the roots of religion. And so he said, okay, the Aborigines, the indigenous people of Australia, are particularly primitive, in, again, his view. There's 6 minutes. There's 6 minutes before this class ends. Come on. All right. Right, so he's looking for the kind of origins of religion in people that he considers particularly primitive. And he looks at the Arunta people in Australia in particular, right? And so, what does he find, right? He says the social order is produced by religion. It plays a part in producing that social order, gives agreed upon norms, values and norms, right? Ritualizes experience through collective effervescence. This is one of my favorite terms from Durkheim, actually, collective effervescence. So effervescence is like bubbles, right? So like when you add, I have a soda stream at home and I like click the bottle in and I add bubbles to my water, I'm adding effervescence. So it adds a sort of collective bubbliness to life. So when if you ever go to like any kind of religious service and people are all doing things at the same time, okay, let's put it a different way. Something maybe a little bit more, for those of you who aren't religious, where maybe a little bit more secular, something that you can relate to. You go to a concert, right? So you land tickets to the Eras tour and you go see Taylor Swift. You do not look happy with that suggestion. Like, I fucking hate Taylor Swift. I burned the tickets. I'm sorry. Let's say you like Taylor Swift. And you go to the Eras tour and, everybody's singing whatever song Taylor Swift is famous for. What is that one? Shake It Off? Who the fuck knows anymore? I don't listen to Taylor Swift and no one can convince me that it's good. But everybody's there, right? You all turn the camera or the flashlight on your phone. You're all waving there, lighting up the whole stadium. And collectively, you're all singing the same lyrics. And you get that warm, bubbly feeling inside of you that being part of some kind of big collective action is. We're all fans of Taylor Swift here. Right? That's collective effervescence, right? And Durkheim thinks that happens in religion a lot, right? Like you all do the same actions and you all get this feeling of collective action and it makes you feel nice, right? It makes you feel like there's bubbles inside you. Or think of like a hockey game, right? You go and the Edmonton Oilers score a goal and everybody stands up and cheers. How do you feel, right? That's collective effervescence, right? Because all of you are together, you're all cheering, you're all doing the wave, right? Collective effervescence. And he thinks, the ritualization of experience creates that collective effervescence, bubbliness in people. Okay. So yeah, when people gather for religious ritual, the mood is heightened, right? Everybody feels this kind of heightened awareness. Effervescence is generated by meeting with people who are like-minded. You all do the same things, and you get this feeling of collective action and happiness. It bonds you together, right? Heightens group social solidarity. Now, for Durkheim, very importantly, Durkheim is an atheist. So he thinks that none of this it thinks it's all a psychological state. None of it has anything to do with religion at the end of the day. He thinks all the aspects of religion, right? The collective effervescence, the morals and values, it's all just a product of society at the end of the day. How long will it take me to do this one last one? I feel like I accomplished something by covering 21 slides this class. I feel very good about myself. I know some of them are question slides. I mean, I experienced that feeling with Noah Kahan on Friday, which is so much better than Taylor Swift. Yes, Noah Kahan. I know who that is. I'm cool. You can trust me. Okay, let's see if I can do this really quickly. Can I do this really quickly? Why don't I pick this up on Friday? I feel like 21 slides is enough death by PowerPoint for one day. All right, let's pick this up on Friday. We'll get through a bunch more on religion. Don't worry, I got tons. And we'll kind of go from there. All right, we'll see you on Friday. Oh.